in the public? Yeah. Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to a joint hearing today with the Senate Budget and Tax Committee and the House Appropriations Committee. We are going to be...
with the times being off, I didn't.
Whoops, somebody needs to be on mute. There we go. We're going to be hearing today from payments to civil divisions of the state, the Department of Budget and Management, State Retirement Agency, and Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans, and the State Board of Elections. So we have a full afternoon of budget briefings. Also, before we begin, David Romans will present the supplemental budget number 2, which has come down from Governor Hogan's office. And so I think what we'll do is begin with David, but I want to welcome Senator, the Chair of Budget and Tax, to ask you if you have anything you want to add.
Nothing at this time. Let's do it.
Okay, David.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I think you're seeing a supplemental budget number 2 document. Great. Hopefully it's large enough. So the first part of the document runs through the general fund items, and then there's also some federal fund items in the supplemental. Overall, the general fund items reduce general fund spending across 21 and 22 by $65 million. The first item is utility arrearage assistance. In the Relief Act, you dedicated $23 million of the Washington gas settlement to utility arrearages. The Attorney General's office has raised concerns that a portion of that may not be able to be used for that purpose unless Washington Gas agrees. The administration has chosen to just replace that money with general funds. There is one little wrinkle, however, which is that the administration also added language saying that if we get additional federal energy assistance program funding for low-income folks, that money would replace these general funds. And the problem with that is we don't believe you can use that money for the arrearage program the General Assembly set up in the Relief Act. So you may want to talk to the administration about removing that language in a subsequent supplemental. So I'm sure we will see more than 2 supplementals. The next item, Controller's Office, $550,000 to help administer the rebates that were authorized in the Stimulus Act, the mailing out and just administering of them. The Department of Budget and Management's budget adds $38 million of general funds, about $39 million overall, for quarantine pay. This is an extra $5.13 an hour that the state has been paying state employees who have to work with patients who are being quarantined because they have COVID. It covers the second half of the current fiscal year, January through June. Also in the Department of Budget and Management is about $6.5 million for increasing salaries of state employees in the state personnel management system and in the transportation system who are not currently making $15 an hour. It would bring them up to $15 an hour. In the Department of Health, there's a little over $3 million for the Office of Minority Health for programming related to socioeconomic and cultural influences on health outcomes. We don't have a lot more information than that. University of Maryland Medical System gets $1.5 million. This is essentially backfilling a Board of Public Works cut from back at the start of the fiscal year, backfilling dollar for dollar. In the Medicaid program, there's $84 million, about $30 million of general funds to increase physician payment rates for evaluation and management services. The state for a number of years now has been trying to pay at least 93% of whatever Medicare pays for those same services. And Medicare is increasing its payment rates. So this is the money necessary to maintain the state at the 93% level, which helps to keep the physicians engaged in the program. In the Department of Human Services, both foster care and temporary cash assistance are getting additional dollars. These were dollars that were noted in the DLS budget analysis because we thought there was underfunding in both programs. They've brought in the money to appropriately fund them both. And fiscal 21 and 22. 15 million for the Department of Labor for interest payments on borrowing from the federal government. So in the Relief Act, you authorized some employers to be able to defer their tax payments until the next calendar year. As a result, we end up borrowing a little bit of money from the federal government to keep, making our own insurance payments. And we'll have to pay interest. There's two issues with this item. One is the interest isn't due until fiscal 22. So it's in the wrong year and it's the wrong amount. We're told they only need about $8 million, not $15 million. So this is an item you probably want to reject, and hopefully the administration will bring it in fiscal 22 at the right amount in a future supplemental. The last general fund item is withdrawing 200 million of general funds from the current fiscal year. In January, the governor proposed a deficiency of 200 million for COVID-related costs, and it was sort of undefined. Since that time, the Biden administration has announced that disaster relief funding will be available to cover 100% of eligible expenses rather than 75%. With that enhanced federal disaster relief money coming in, it's no longer believed that this 200 million is necessary, so that's why it's being withdrawn. On the federal fund side, they brought in about $145 million for the health department for testing and tracing from CARES Act money. This is the money back from March, April. And then we get the December federal stimulus money, which adds up to about $361 million. This is not all of the December stimulus money. There'll still be more that you should see for transportation, housing.
Hi, I'm in committee.
Education. The money that came in though in the supplemental is for sort of health and human services programs. You can see Department of Aging gets money for home delivered meals. There's money for testing and tracing, for vaccine administration, a little bit of money for the hospitals, as well as local health departments getting about $11 million. And then $1.5 million or so for elder abuse prevention provided by the Department of Human Services. So as I said, there's probably another 600 million or so that we should see in future supplementals. Mainly housing and transportation are the two big ones. And the last set of federal dollars is about 310 million in this last grouping. The first 210 is disaster relief money related to COVID-19 vaccine distribution. We're truing up the amount of opioid response grant funding we're getting from the federal government. And I'll go through the Behavioral Health Administration for a variety of grants that they give out. Also in behavioral health, a couple of $1 million to help individuals impacted by COVID-19. So a little over $500,000 for crisis counseling and training and treatment for long-term care facility personnel. And then finally, there's a little over $80 million for the Department of Labor for administration of the unemployment insurance program. And recently the department took some emergency contracts to the Board of Public Works to bolster their staff and their call center, and this money will help pay for those contracts that run through much of the rest of this calendar year. The last item there, it doesn't have a dollar number associated with it, but it's quite significant actually. The administration is effectively withdrawing its BRFA proposal to use 101 million of the transfer tax to help the general fund. And where that really helps you all in the capital budget is that the administration had backfilled the diversion of transfer tax revenues by bonding that 101 million of costs in fiscal 22. Since they're not going to do the transfer tax diversion, you no longer need to spend that 101 million in the capital budget on those programs, program open space and so forth. So you have 101 million to fund legislative priorities in the capital budget as a result. The last thing I wanted to show you is just sort of where this leaves you in terms of your fund balance. So a lot of things have happened since January. You've passed the Relief Act, you've overridden some vetoes, most notably the tobacco tax. You've passed Senate bill, I think it's 218, expanding the earned income tax credit. And then you've gotten 2 supplemental budgets. So the bottom line is that right now, the cash balance at the end of fiscal 22 would be about $19 million after accounting for all of those things. But don't worry, there's quite a bit of money that's going to be on the table. For one, the most notable amount is over 300 million of enhanced Medicaid match, because the Biden administration has announced they will provide the enhanced match from July through December, which was not expected when the budget was proposed. So that's 317 million of federal dollars that will replace general funds. And you'll be hearing the Medicaid budget analysis later this week, and we've identified a few $100 million of additional surplus funding in the Medicaid budget that we think you can also take out of the budget. So you should have no difficulties in balancing the budget and restoring the rainy day fund to 5%, as it's below that right now because of the use of it to help fund the Relief Act. So that's really all I had to say about the supplemental. Happy to answer any questions.
I actually have a question. Let's go back to the local health departments. We actually just had a conversation in my office about local health departments, the desire to make sure they are better funded going forward. And I know our subcommittee chair has a bill in, and I think the Speaker Pro Tem of the Senate may have a companion bill in looking at funding, but this then $11 million, additional $11.2 million is for FY21 and 23?
Yeah, both years, both 21 and 22. It's a little bit in each year.
22, okay. And do we know if that is going to be distributed by formula?
I can find out for you. I do not know off the top of my head.
One of the, yeah, and if I would ask you, by the way, to do us this, to go back through many of these items that you know has a formula that drives the funding, and see if their plans are to distribute these funds using the existing formula. Reason I ask that, as you know, there have been three items that have come through the Sellinger grants, the new money for Sellinger. And I think even the new money that they came in for community colleges. These are formula driven typically, but they did not use the existing formula. So those are things that is, I think, helpful for both committees to know as we move into budget decisions.
Sure, we'll look at that for you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Dave? Any other questions? I do not see any on the House side or the Senate side. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
The committees, we're now going to move to our budget overview, and we're going to ask Rebecca Ruff to come forward. Rebecca, are you here?
There you go. Oh, thank you. Don't lose it. And I'm sorry, it looks wetter.
I'll make a copy and give it back to you.
Yeah.
Is Rebecca here? Oops. Oh, you know what? I'm looking for Jason. I'm sorry. Jason Kramer.
Hi. I'm not as smart or as talented as Rebecca, but I'll do my best.
Well, I looked at the wrong line. I apologize.
All right. Are we all set? I'm Jason
We are
Kramer.
all set.
All right.
Yeah.
And I'll be presenting the analysis for payments to civil divisions of the state.
Correct.
Let me share my screen first of all. There we go. Wrong one, but I'll switch it. There we go. So this budget, this portion of the budget is comprised of three items. Disparity grant, the primary one is disparity grants to low wealth jurisdictions based on a formula set in statute. There are also grants to mitigate the impact of the local assumption of a portion of teacher retirement costs. Those amounts are set in statute. And there is a small amount of special funds that are gaming revenue related grants to Calvert County. As shown here on page 1, the budget decreases by $10.3 million, and that's primarily based on formula. The reason for those changes are changing demographics in Baltimore City, as well as a sunset provision that changed a portion of the formula. We'll next go to Exhibit 1. This is a summary by county of the various grant amounts in the fiscal 2022 allowance. As you can see, the middle column is the teacher supplemental retirement grants that is set in statute, and the column on the left is the disparity grant that is based on a formula, which I'll explain in just a moment. Exhibit 2 shows the changes in fiscal 2022 compared to fiscal 2021 by county. As you can see, Baltimore City's grant declined by $2.9 million year over year. That's due to a combination in the city of increased wealth and declining population. That has the effect of increasing the per capita tax yield, which is what the formula is primarily based upon, which hurts the grant amount under the formula. Prince George's County declined by $4.1 million, the largest decrease by county. For Prince George's County and all of these other counties listed on this chart, the decline in the disparity grant revenue is due to a change in the disparity grant formula. The formula caps the grant to a county at its 2010 amount that it received. Previously, the formula allowed counties with a 3.2% piggyback tax rate to get at least 67.5% of their uncapped amount. However, that rate sunset. And so for fiscal 22, the amount is now 60%. Turning to Exhibit 3, there was legislation that was passed last session, House Bill 737, that would have eliminated the sunset and set the grant cap at grant floor at 75% of the 2010 amount. This chart shows the impact of the governor's veto of that bill, showing that it reduced spending for disparity grants by $15.2 million. And as you can see, Prince George's County's grant was reduced by nearly $8 million due to this veto. Exhibit 4 shows the calculation. If anybody's interested, I could discuss it, but I won't unless I have any requests. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Jason, Madam Chair.
Chairman, you're muted, I believe.
Senator Eckert.
I thought there was an overriding of the governor's veto on the disparity grants.
Right, but that wouldn't affect the fiscal 22 allowance because the governor had already submitted his budget prior to the veto being overridden.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, you have some members.
I do, and there we go. I got it off mute. Delegate Grice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not really a question, I guess a comment to both committees on that veto. And I think most of us voted to override that veto on House Bill 737. In fact, my home county, which is a very poor county, they're going to be impacted to the tune of almost $1 million, and that's a lot of money for Caroline County. And I can tell you, and it's upsetting to me because the county commissioners made a very difficult decision during an election year to raise their taxes all the way to the max at 3.2% piggyback tax. And unfortunately, and they made that decision based on, our attempts to get that bill passed in the first place. So I'm hoping that, our budget committees will be able to work through this somehow to be able to figure out how, that was certainly the legislative intent, and it was a bipartisan legislative intent in passing that bill. So that was just some comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Delegate Beitzel.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. This may not be the final number with these numbers that were presented here, but it's interesting that to know that we can share maybe with at least or answer a question now and then. Is it possible to get this presentation emailed to our offices, or can we pick it up, or can we get the information that's presented here today?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move along now to Ann Wagner, Department of Budget and Management.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just share my screen so I can walk through this document with you all. Okay. So today I'll be presenting the DBM Secretary Analysis. Jumping right into the budget discussion, the fiscal 22 allowance increases by about $3.5 million in mostly in special funds to a total budget of about $35 million. More than half of the budget is supported by special funds, and that includes the central collection unit's expenditures using administrative fees that it collects. Then I'll move into the performance analysis section. This item looks at the central collection unit, which collects debts like MVA fines and toll violations and other debts to the state. Looking at Exhibit 1 on page 4, the bars on this chart show the percent of debts referred to CCU that had a payment recovered. And most recently, this measure increased to just under 15% of debts with a payment recovered. In fiscal 2016, I'll just highlight that CCU received a backlog of over $1.8 million, 1.8 million Easy Pass toll violations. And this caused the large drop off in this measure. CCU attributed the slight growth in fiscal 20 partially to the Maryland Transportation Authority stopping the referral of these types of toll violations. The Maryland Transportation Authority stopped referring those while they're undergoing toll modernization efforts. So in the next few fiscal years, another backlog of toll violations can be expected. So that would drive another decrease. That could be, similar to what you saw in fiscal 2016, as that backlog would be happening again. And then the other measure on this chart shows CCU's reversions of its administrative fees to the general fund. CCU charges a 17% administrative fee on outstanding debts referred to it, and those fees are used to cover the unit's operating expenses. Any balance above 15% of the operating expenses then reverts to the general fund at the end of each fiscal year. So basically the takeaway here is that CCU has reverted some amount of funding each year. So it is collecting enough fees to support its operations in each of these years. And most recently in fiscal 20, it actually reverted more funding, partially due to higher collections, but also due to a drop in their operating expenses as a major IT project is completed. So then moving on to the budget discussion, there were some pandemic impacts on DBM's operations other than all employees or most employees going to teleworking. Some employees were diverted to focus on the state's pandemic response, and CCU also ceased active debt collections in mid-March of last year. And some of their staff members were also trained to assist the Department of Labor with processing unemployment claims. So you did see some staff from this office being diverted to the COVID-19 response. And then since then, in terms of the active debt collections, the CCU's debt collection activities resumed in October of 2020. So then I'll move on to the fiscal 22 allowance, and I'm jumping ahead to page 7. This chart shows the fiscal 22 allowance broken up by use of funds. DBM is mainly an administrative budget, so over half of the funding is going toward regular personnel, with the next largest share going toward IT system costs for the CCU and the Office of Budget Analysis, their BARS budgeting system. Then moving on to the comparison of the fiscal 22 allowance to the current fiscal 21 working appropriation. The largest change here is that you're seeing an increase of about $3 million in special funds. This is happening because, as I mentioned before, CCU had a major IT project that is coming to a close. And so some of the maintenance costs that were budgeted under the Department of Information Technology are now being moved under the Department of Budget and Management's office. So that's driving the $3 million increase in their budget there. There is one BRFA provision that relates to DBM, and that's on the budget books that the General Assembly and DLS receive with the introduction of the budget each year. This provision allows DBM to print fewer copies of the fiscal 22 budget books due to the pandemic. This only applies to this year, and it would not affect budget book printing in the future. So then moving on to the personnel discussion. Under personnel, DBM doesn't show a change in the allowance, but I will note that 3 positions were transferred into DBM during fiscal 21. This is due to the Governor's Office of Performance Improvement transferring from the Executive Department to DBM. The goal here is that the office will being under DBM will allow for better collaboration with the Office of Budget Analysis, but the mission and the work of the office isn't expected to change. So next, I'll go over the single issue in this analysis, and that's on the budget amendment process during the COVID-19 pandemic. So to begin with a description of the typical amendment process, there is annual budget language that establishes a legislative review process for certain amendments. Usually amendments above $100,000 would fall under this legislative review, and they must be submitted to DLS, and then the budget committees or the Legislative Policy Committee can consider the amendment, or after 45 days after DBM submitted the amendment to DLS, it would be allowed to be approved by the governor. So this language, this annual language allows for some exceptions to the legislative review, including if BPW declares that the amendment is essential for public safety. However, during this past interim, the budget amendment process was used to appropriate additional federal funds authorized in the CARES Act and other federal legislation for COVID-19 aid. So there was a lot more funding going through the amendment process, as there was a lot more federal aid announced and authorized after the fiscal 21 budget was passed. Because Maryland has been in a declared state of emergency since March 5th of last year, the governor also had increased authority to suspend statutes, and the governor did use this authority to suspend the legislative review process for some amendments. And he used this for some amendments that provided funding for the COVID-19 response. So an example of this emergency power being used is that there's a fiscal 21 amendment that appropriated $250 million from the rainy day fund for economic recovery and public health uses. And so the governor had signed that amendment without legislative review by suspending the statute that would have required that legislative review. And I will note that even when legislative review is not required, DBM typically does send all amendments to DLS for informational and monitoring purposes. So I'll turn to this exhibit on page 11. This shows the timing of when DLS has received amendments over the past 3 fiscal years. So I'll just note here that it is common for DLS to receive amendments after the close of the fiscal year. You can see that as, you know, the green, yellow, and purple bars are all amendments that came in after the close of that fiscal year. That's often due to the closeout process. There are amendments that come in later to realign expenditures as part of that closeout process. But I will note that there was a noticeable delay with more amendments being submitted in the second quarter of fiscal 21 for fiscal 20 amendments. So there was a noticeable delay in the amendments this year. And then I'll also note that in fiscal 18 and 19, there were maybe 1 or 2 amendments that had come in January. We haven't received amendments in this 3rd quarter of fiscal 21, but there are still outstanding amendments that we know of, but haven't received the actual amendment yet as of March. So we know DLS knows that because we receive closeout documents, and those documents show that MDH, for example, should reflect about $688 million in coronavirus relief funds appropriated to them through amendments. But so far, DLS has received amendments adding only about $280 million. So there are still outstanding federal funds that haven't been, you know, submitted as amendments to DLS and to the budget committees. And so these delays in receiving the budget amendments does create a challenge for analysts to conduct their evaluation, since there's not a clear picture of how the fiscal 20 actual spending occurred, and we haven't seen some of those amendments. So then I'll move on to the next exhibit on page 12. This just shows the extent of the funding that was appropriated through amendments in fiscal 20. This includes funding that was transferred or added after the close of the fiscal year. You can see, you know, there's a very large increase compared to fiscal 18 and 19. That's not very surprising considering all the federal aid that was authorized. But we just wanted to note here that this exhibit is showing the funding that we received the amendments after the fiscal year had closed. So the spending had already occurred. And because the processing was not done in a timely manner, it did not provide a chance for legislature to review the amendments or review how the funding was going to be spent. So far this session, there have been supplemental budgets adding a lot of the new federal aid that's been announced, like the December federal aid, and including the supplemental budget just described earlier. However, to the extent that additional federal aid might be announced or authorized, the amendment process again would be used to appropriate funding at that point. And so there is an emergency bill introduced this session that would alter the amendment process in fiscal 21 and 22 for certain federal funds so that these funds couldn't be added through budget amendment except for specified uses. However, like the annual amendment process, there would be a contingency where amendments could be approved if BPW determines that they're essential. I'll note here that there is a DLS recommendation for annual language on the amendment process. And if this bill were to pass, then DLS just notes here that this language might need to be amended to correspond with the bill. And then in the agency remarks, DBM should discuss its delays in processing budget amendments and whether its current capacity is sufficient to maintain a timely and transparent process when it, and then also just comment on when it will be submitting any outstanding fiscal 20 amendments. And then moving on to the recommended actions, this begins on page 14 and goes through page 24. These actions are standard language that have been included in past budgets to define reporting requirements and other aspects of the budget process. For the sake of time, I won't go through each of these, and there are no changes to this language from last year, but I will highlight action 10. This is the action that is the annual language for the budget amendment process, as I discussed just now. So this is the item that would probably need to be amended to coincide with the bill should that pass. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions? I see none, so let's,
Madam Chair,
yes.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I have a question. Looks
okay.
like there are some others as well.
Yes. Delegate Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Ann. This is kind of a question about how DBM, or I guess OBA, is administered. Do you know how they keep track of legislatively mandated budget items?
I don't know off the top of my head their processes. I'm sure that, I mean, the secretary will be next up, and I would hope he would be able to.
Yep, I'll ask him as well, but you know, okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Delegate Krim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to go over the CCU information that you provided in regard to video tolls. Could you go over that, please? And do you know when those items are turned over to CCU from MDTA?
I don't know that.
Does the toll, or how old does the violation have to be before it's turned over to CCU for non-payment?
So I don't know the answer to that. I look it up, or hopefully CCU can fill in their process for exactly when the violation would go to them. To go over kind of like what happened with those specific debts. I mean, in fiscal 16, I think it was a new process that the toll violations would, easy pass violations would go to CCU. I don't believe that those formerly went to CCU for collections. In 2018, there was another drop, and that actually had to do more with a technical issue. It wasn't necessarily the toll violations specifically that caused that drop. And the agency had reported that because MDTA is going through, or excuse me, the Maryland Transportation Authority is going through their toll modernization, that these violations, or the easy pass violations, haven't been referred to CCU for the time being. I could double check exactly what period that is and when CCU expects to start receiving those debts again, but I would have to clarify with them on that timing.
And do you have any information about the amount CCU charges they add on to the toll and the penalty? I think they're allowed to go up to 20%
Yes, CCU,
right now. Go ahead.
yeah, the administrative fee can go up to 20%. It's currently set at 17%.
So that, and that is on the total toll and penalty, correct?
Yeah, it's on the principal and the interest owed. Yes, for any
Okay.
debt.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions, so let's have the Honorable David Brinkley come forward, and Mark, Nicole, please stay close at hand with us, okay?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee. Excuse me. First, in reference to the question Delegate Krim just asked, Undefeated advises, this is not on this call, that MDTA has no fixed schedule for getting claims to them. They receive it, I guess, by computer and by batch, and so then we start working from there. So I think any delay on timeline, as I understand it, would be on their end. Once we receive it, it goes through the intake process and then it moves forward from there. So I just wanted to touch base on that while that was fresh in my mind. So, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, members of both committees, for the record, my name is David Brinkley. I'm the Secretary for the Department of Budget and Management. With me today are Deputy Secretary Mark Nicole and Jonathan Martin, the Director of the Budget Analysis. And I know that the rest of my team is certainly listening. Unlike other years where I've had everybody in the room that might be able to take on a question like what Delegate Krim just had. So we're trying to rely on our technology to try to reach out as we hear that. But if we don't have an answer, we'll certainly follow up and get it to you. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to DLS's analysis of the proposed FY22 budget for the DBM Office of the Secretary. I'm here today certainly to testify in support of the FY22 budget, but to respond to the issues and recommendations raised by the DLS analysis and to answer any other questions that you all may have. I've submitted brief written testimony as well, which I will not read to you. I know that you will appreciate that. I appreciated it when I was in your situation. And Ann Wagner did a thorough analysis for you, and I thank her for the well-researched and presented report that she did. But most important, I want to speak to what our state has faced over this past year. A year ago, this Friday, Maryland had its first 3 cases of the coronavirus. No one could have ever predicted the challenges that we have faced in the ensuing year, the public health crisis that isolated Marylanders, nor the economic crisis that quickly left so many people unemployed and others underemployed. As of this morning's report from the Department of Health, 383,702 Marylanders have fallen ill from this virus, and at least 7,723 have died. 7,723. For far too many, this virus has taken a devastating toll on their lives and on their families. And now, not only are healthcare professionals and researchers realizing the impacts of new variants, which is normal in a virus's evolution, but we're now realizing and will have to face the unknown long-term effects of the virus on the neurologic, respiratory, and circulatory systems of survivors, both short and long-term fighters of the virus. All of these are now just being discovered, much less are we able to develop some treatments for them. So fear and uncertainty are the 2 realities that face many Marylanders every single day. If it weren't for the quick, decisive actions by many, especially the professionals and workers of the state, we would be in far worse shape than we are today. So before I go on to my responses to the analysis, let me also thank you, the Fiscal committees, and your staff at DLS, and subsequently the legislature as a whole, for your decisive and quick actions to pass the Governor's Relief Act of 2021. Last week, we reported to the legislature the timeline for implementation and highlighted a couple of early successes. So while I'm not going to read the letter that was submitted to President Ferguson and Speaker Jones, I do want to point out some highlights. Within a week of that act becoming law, we were able to distribute $2 million for the Main Street program. We implemented the $100 increase in the temporary disability assistance funding or the TDAP grants for those who qualify. Madam Chair, as you and I discussed last night by phone, the disparity grant budget amendments have been ratified and the Comptroller's office is preparing disbursements. And again, we had a conversation in the office today that we're just going to follow up to see where that lies. And EITC or the Earned Income Tax Credit stimulus payments have gone out the door. We are making tremendous strides in rolling out the funding and overcoming some of the obstacles that have arisen for the 33 programs funded by the Relief Act. These committees will be receiving another update next week on other continued efforts. I'll now turn to the issues highlighted by DLS with the proposed FY22 budget and the DBM Office of the Secretary. The budget amendment process requires a level of cooperation among multiple parties. Generally works very smoothly and in a timely manner. We saw that in the graphics that were presented. In a myriad of ways, the pandemic significantly impacted this process. In response to the pandemic, state agencies sprang into action. They had to purchase much needed supplies such as cleaning materials, PPE, hardware, software, managing face-to-face interactions, however they could be. And they were suspended for a while, but then we had to put in the separators, and just as the Senate's dealing with on the floor. So they had those challenges to deal with. They had to collect information, then qualify those people. And right here, I'm talking about commerce with some of the business grants and certainly labor with unemployment. And then they had to deal with the distribution of millions of dollars to employers, local governments, housing programs, resources to purchase and deliver food, and billions of dollars of unemployment benefits. And the list goes on. And guess what? It's going to continue. And I don't mean to diminish the challenges people have faced with unemployment insurance or legal. Far from it. But I do also want to shine a light on the billions of dollars that were moved out and into the Maryland economy because of their efforts. The state workforce worked around the clock to manage significant increases in funding related to COVID-19 recovery and the relief efforts. Our state agencies focused on getting those dollars out the door and into the hands of those who needed them, especially the health department, as it focused its entire energies on the crisis at hand. We made sure that there was an infrastructure in place to manage an influx of hospital visits. In fact, when you really look at it, we standed up 4 hospitals. By that I mean the Baltimore City Convention Center, DPSCS put in a facility in Hagerstown, a secure facility in Hagerstown, the former Adventist Hospital in Tacoma Park, and the former Laurel Regional Hospital. They were up and running in a matter of weeks. And I know that I heard from the governor that he was told it might take 18 months. Very successful in moving that forward. The oversight and the assistance of the nursing homes where a severe toll took place among residents and staff. Certainly making sure that we had the testing and the lab capacity. It was a monumental task that required 110% of everyone's effort and attention. Caused significant delays in our ability to process. Everybody was all hands on deck, and yet playing a lot of catch up at this point. We recognize it's a problem, and we're taking steps to improve that timeliness. In fact, the budget amendments to process the Relief Act were done within a day of passage. The Comptroller was able to distribute the vast majority of the Earned Income Tax Credit stimulus checks within 48 hours. We agree the budget amendment process last year was not ideal. We're working with the appropriate agencies to improve it. The point is, not only was it an extraordinary year for the world, the country, our state, our people, but also in how we do business, and that includes budget amendments. So DBM concurs with 9 of the operating budget recommendations. That's 82%. So battling employment made by the analysts. But we do continue to oppose recommendations 2 and 3, which will rise every year. Recommendation 2 limits our ability to place appropriations in a contingency reserve and was a tool afforded to previous administrations. Identical. Recommendation number 3 is another management tool afforded to prior recommendations or prior administrations. Both recommendations limit the flexibility needed to manage not only current budgets, but also potentially items in the future. And nothing more underscores the importance of budget flexibility than the fiscal uncertainty we have faced this past year. Therefore, I respectfully request that at least one committee and the conference committee to reject these recommendations. While DBM does not concur with recommendations 2 and 3, we do concur with recommendations 1 and recommendations 4 through 11, which are customary in the budget language. So, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, that concludes my prepared remarks for today. I appreciate the opportunity to address you about the FY22 budget from the office and secretary. The team and I will attempt to answer your questions, and if we don't have the answers now, we'll certainly.
Mark, do you have anything to add?
Mark, I do not. No.
Okay.
Oh, Madam Chair, I hope the sound system's a little better here. I think we spent $39.95 for a new microphone, so maybe that'll help.
Yeah, it's a little better. We have a couple of questions here. Delegate Corman.
Madam Chair, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just the same question that I asked Ann. I don't know if you heard it, but how does the department keep track of the various legislative mandates? I know you don't like them, but of course you always comply with them, or I shouldn't say always, but typically comply with them. So what's the tracking system for that?
Thank you for that. We do our best to comply with them. I know that at the end of the year, I get a report written by staff here, probably within about 2 or 3 weeks of signing down, 2 or 3 weeks of signing down, and they come, we itemize everything that we've gotten and the deadlines. Try to structure our work progress by that point in time. I'll tell you that as the numbers go up, frankly, I make the decision then to start prioritizing what really needs to get out. It may not be what people want to hear, but based on the workload that they have to do, also everything else that we do, and then try to do a prioritization of the items that makes the biggest bang for the buck. So I think it's about the first of May to get that report. It's not a report, it's just an internal spreadsheet. This is what we have, this is where we have to collect the data from, or these are deadlines that we have, and many times that then identifies also conflicts. Just try to manage that through.
So I'm having a little trouble with your $40 microphone, but I think you might have been responding to my question, a question about JCR requests, which is not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about statutory budget mandates. So for example, if Delegate Resnick mandates money for robotics grants, or Delegate Corman mandates money for WMATA, which obviously all these things require full legislative approval for, but we're the authors of those bills. How do you track all of those? And the reason I'm asking is, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but one of the departments under the governor's control failed to comply with a mandate. They did not budget for the mandate, and they did not put a BRFA item in to get out of that mandate. So I'm trying to understand the process. And I guess I'm also curious if you're aware of their failure to comply with the statute.
I'm not aware of what you're referencing until you tell me what it is. Then at that point in time, it's also, remember, it's up to the departments also to know what their mandates are like. To let us know that when they make their budget submission in the fall, we have these to do that are programmatic. These are some of the mandates. We certainly cross-check them. And then the individual analyst that's assigned to their agency certainly would be on top of it that way. So what is the agency that you're referencing?
Sure. So the Maryland Transit Administration and the Maryland Department of Transportation, which I recognize is treated a little bit differently, I think, by your department than some of the other departments in the executive branch, although it is an executive branch function, did not meet a mandate for its operating costs. They're short somewhere between $50 million and $67 million, depending on if DLS is right. or MDOT's CFO is right. So I would just ask, not to take everybody's time, that you take a look at that because, we expect either mandates to be met around here or BRFA provisions to be put in to address that. And in this case, neither has occurred, which I know from, past exchanges with you, you may not like mandates, but you usually respect them. So we'd love your assistance sort of sorting this out.
I'll take that as a compliment. We do try to respect them. Yes, we have opposed them just because of, certainly the nature as we're trying to manage everything else. But we do try to respect them. We do try to acknowledge those. But you're also right in that transportation funding is its own separate beast. We have somewhat limited, I won't say influence, but limited capabilities when it comes to that. But
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you again, Mr. Secretary. I had a question that's actually somewhat related to the supplemental budget request that we were just going through earlier, and it kind of brought a topic to the front of my mind that I know we talked about earlier in the summer and in the fall. I was really glad to see the additional money come in for the quarantine and isolation pay increase, and appreciate DBM's work on that. I know we were all hoping we wouldn't still need it at this point, but I'm glad that it was in there. But I know that many of the folks who are doing the same job with quarantining students at the university system are not getting it. And obviously, I know USM has its own own personnel policy, but I'm just sort of curious what conversations took place within the administration from DBM over to USM. Any conversation about taking some of the federal money that you all have discretionary authority over and, giving it to USM to provide that same pay increase for, the workers who are dealing with, frankly, an ever increasing number of students, it looks like, who are going into quarantine, particularly at College Park. And I know we'll have the College Park president before our committee tomorrow, later in the week, but just kind of curious what conversations DBM has had.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They are a totally separate beast and concept there, but also keep in mind that the university systems, and I think the whole higher education system took a significant reduction. We went to Board of Public Works in July 1. So they were put under even further constraints by that aspect. Now, subsequently, had there been additional federal monies coming their way? Sure, I don't know off my head what there was. Is there more coming? Yes, but we don't have the influence on that right now. Our issue is certainly making sure that those areas where we do have quarantine, SCS, certain areas of Department of Health and things like that we accommodate that aspect. But that's an ongoing conversation that you have to have. But remember, they took a significant reduction on July.
Right. And I appreciate that. I just, I'm just trying to think, again, we want to make sure we're protecting our frontline staff, and, the folks who are, managing quarantine dorms on campuses across the state are, in just as much danger potentially as folks in other parts of state agencies. And I realize they're different, but would encourage you all to have, maybe more of a creative conversation on how to make sure that those employees are getting their fair compensation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Geraldine Valentino-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I've asked a couple of secretaries this question, and I apologize if I've already asked you. Just trying to look to see if there's going to be a working document, kind of a sense of transparency, something that we can share with the public and something that we can use as a tool that shows all of the different federal money that's come in, what it's been designated for or what's discretionary, and where it's been spent to date, and then that we can look at on an evolving basis regularly to keep track of it, because there'll be additional federal money coming. So we appreciate we have some in budget reports and we have some in supplemental budgets, but just will there be one place where we can look at this and we can also show our constituents to keep track of it all?
Actually, there is one place. It's not online yet. I'm going to turn it over to Mark in a second, but we have been successful. You heard earlier in the analysis that we brought over some of the analysis team to help the operating budget team. One of their missions has been to create an online space, an internet space, where people could go down and identify that. The The thing that's going to be phenomenal about that is it won't be a snapshot in time on the report as of April 30th or May 31st or something along those lines. It will be updated instantly. I saw a preview of it 2 weeks ago, I think, and I saw it. And literally it'll go down by zip code, it will go down by the area, and it will, in fact, if anything, it probably will get a lot of criticism from some people because they may find some disparities and all, which is fine. We want to hear that. But our mission is to have that out there on the internet. Mark, why don't you give us an update on where that's been and what it looks like? What I saw was phenomenal, but it was also our first look at it. And in that context, I had a lot of questions that I fired back at them. And I know that they were trying to work through some of the challenges.
Sure. So,
Around so they can hear you. The sound system's not working.
right. So we are continuing to sort of test that system. We're working with the Governor's Office of Performance Improvement and all of the agencies and sort of collecting the data. So we have the federal funds that we received for the coronavirus relief funds, where we sort of started on that. We're going to bring in the funds that we use out of the rainy day fund, the $250 million the analysts talked about before. We want to sort of incorporate that in there. We are also sort of related to that, going to try to do the same thing for the Recovery Now fund that passed as part of the Relief Act last week. So we're going to try to put this all together in one sort of big site. We're hoping to be able to get that done in the pretty near future.
Thank you. And I appreciate the efforts and look forward to it. And it will be helpful if we could also, sorry, my battery running low thing just came on. It would be helpful if we can see how much, if there's ledgers, like how much still is not spent. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think that's all the questions.
Thank you, and stay safe, everybody. And I think I see both of your committees tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you. All right, we're now going to move to Jason Kramer again, State Retirement Agency.
I'm back. Never left.
Back.
All right. I'm Jason Kramer, and I'll be presenting now the analysis for the State Retirement Agency. The SRA, at the direction of the Board of Trustees, has primary responsibility over the state's retirement systems. Oh, wait, I got to share my screen. There we go. The fiscal 2022 allowance is $44.7 million, although that's overstated slightly due to some reporting errors in the non-budgeted divisions personnel costs, which I'll explain in just a minute. The agency is funded through an administrative charge on all employers for whom the agency administers retirement benefits. State agencies account for roughly a third of the SRA's funding, which is represented by the purple reimbursable funds on the chart, while local school boards and governmental units make up the rest of the funding, represented by special funds. And again, the red represents non-budgeted investment division, which I'll discuss in a second. That legislation was passed in 2018. I'll move ahead to Exhibit 1. This exhibit shows membership in the state's retirement system by active employees and retirees. Active membership has been flat since around fiscal 2012, while retired members have increased by about 4% annually and now account for about 46% of active participation in fiscal at the close of fiscal 2020. The flattening out of active employee participation, while retiree participation increases, means that there's less payroll supporting retiree benefits, which results in the need for higher employer contributions. I'll jump ahead to Exhibit 2, a part of the MFR section of this analysis. Exhibit 2 shows SRA's call center goal for wait times. That's the green line across the bottom. There were some process changes in calendar 2019 that led to some high wait times in the early and late part of the year. In 2020, reduced call volumes related to the initial initial months of the pandemic led to a reduction in wait times, but then subsequently rebounded. Part of this is due to teleworking staff at the agency not able to handle quite as many calls as they are when in the office, and that has led to spikes in wait times later in the year. Moving to Exhibit 3 for a discussion of the budget. Exhibit 3 shows the fiscal 2022 allowance. The budget consists of 3 major components. The investment division, again, which is non-budgeted, accounts for about 39% of the allowance. The MPAS major IT project, fiscal 2022 is the final year of this project. It should be complete by the end of the fiscal year, accounts for a very small amount of the allowance. And agency operations account for 60% of the allowance, with personnel accounting for most of the costs there. Moving to Exhibit 4. Exhibit 4 compares the fiscal 2022 budget to fiscal 2021. The largest changes can be found in the $1.2 million decrease in the MPAS 3 IT project. As I said, it's winding down, entering its final year. That project re-engineered a wide swath of SRA's business processes. It included the member internet portal, My SRPS, which has been live for a little while now. $1.6 million reduction in the investment division is incorrect in the budget submission. Actual costs that were approved by the board for fiscal 21 and 22 actually increased by about $100,000. That's driven by increases in salary of about $650,000 that are offset by reductions in contractual services. The reason for the discrepancy is that the investment division's personnel system doesn't really work very well with the state personnel system because of their authority over salary and creating positions. So DLS is recommending committee narrative requesting that SRA provide accurate data with the budget submission every year. Moving next to a brief discussion of personnel at the agency. This retirement agency abolished one long-term agency with the fiscal 2022 allowance. It was a long-term vacancy that was a project manager for the IT project. Of the 215 regular positions, 41 are in the investment division. I'll now move on to the issue section of the analysis. I have 3 issues I'd like to discuss. The first is regards to reinvestment savings contributions. Pension reforms, as you might remember from back in 2011, included plans to provide supplemental retirement savings reinvestment contributions annually. Since 2016, that amount has been mandated to be $75 million. At the start of this fiscal year, DBM informed the Comptroller's Central Payroll Bureau to not collect that reinvestment portion of the pension contribution. In recognition of this action, actuaries for the retirement agency recommended pension rates for fiscal 22, which the board adopted, assuming that there would be no supplemental contribution in 21. However, in January, DBM informed Central Payroll to restart collection at double the rate of that $75 million contribution to collect the full year's amount, despite the rates that were set for fiscal 22 and the potential for some legislative action surrounding these funds. So with all that being said, DLS is recommending a BRFA provision to revert and cancel the $75 million in fiscal 2021 for this reinvestment savings contribution, as well as recommending cutting the $75 million contribution for fiscal 2022 in light of fiscal needs in the state. The second issue I'll discuss is the internal management of funds by the non-budgeted investment division. The committees in last year's JCR requested a report detailing the expenses of the investment division compared to the savings from not procuring comparable contractual services. A summary of that report is provided here in Exhibit 5. The top half of this exhibit shows the increase in expenses related to bringing those the management of those funds in-house. The primary reason for those cost increases is in personnel, adding new salary, increasing salary for existing staff, and adding support staff to support the internal management. And then there's a small amount of additional costs for additional services required, trading platforms and information services and so forth. By 2024, the expected increase in costs for the investment division from bringing those services in-house will be an additional $12 million or so. Bottom half of this chart shows the savings due to bringing those investment services in-house, primarily due to not paying the fees associated with management of funds. That's the primary source of the savings, up to $41 million by fiscal 24. And the other portion of these savings is in co-investment savings from co-investment, which has to do with private equity investments. Overall, the agency reports expecting to save more than $53 million by the end of fiscal 2024. The final issue I'll discuss is the performance of the fund over the last fiscal year. Exhibit 8 shows the state's investment performance in fiscal 2020. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one here. Exhibit 6 here shows the state's assets and liabilities. Fiscal 2020 closed with the plan funded at 72.9% funded. And that's 1/10 of a percentage point below projections that were made at the time of reform. So the plan is on track approximately with projections made at the time of reforms. Exhibit 8 shows the state's investment performance in fiscal 2020 by asset allocation. The total fund performance, as you can see down here at the bottom, was a return of about 3.57%. That's below the actuarial assumption of 7.4%, but ahead of the benchmarks that you can see you'll see in Exhibit 9. Exhibit 9 shows the benchmark performance, and as you can see, especially in the key categories such as equity, where about 50% of the funds are located, the plans exceeded benchmarks by several percentage points. Total, as I said, total fund performance was 3.57%, but it exceeded the benchmarks slightly. Finally, just so you can see where the plan's funds are allocated, this chart shows the target allocation, the actual allocation among different categories of funds. As I said, about half of the plan's assets are in growth and equity, with other large categories in rate sensitive funds and real assets. And just a quick summary of the recommended actions. DLS is recommending a $75 million across the board reduction for the supplemental retirement contribution. Committee narrative requesting a report on investment division personnel costs. And finally, a BRFA provision to revert and cancel the $75 million in reinvestment savings contributions in fiscal 2021. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions? I see none. So we'll bring up Mr. Kinderdine, Executive Director, and Andrew Palmer, Chief Investment Officer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we also have our board chairman, Treasurer Nancy Kopp, and I believe she would like to make opening remarks with your permission.
Okay, good. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed you. We're
all right. They always do.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committees. I'm Nancy Kopp, the Chairman of the Board of Trustees of your pension system and your State Treasurer. And joining me today, as you can see, are Dean Kinderdine, our CEO, and Andrew Palmer, somewhere, I believe, our CIO. And I noticed Secretary Brinkley, my fellow trustee, is also there. I just wanted to, first of all, thank Mr. Kramer for a really good analysis. I know he's been thrown into this, and I think he did a very, very good job. And we will certainly try to respond and live up to his recommendations. Although I must say, I do disagree with one of them. But let me just sum up. Jason summed up very well where we are fiscally. Just to say that after the reforms of 2011, we in fact are now significantly lower in terms of the proportion of payroll which the state is contributing to the system. We are right on track for funding at 72.9%, and we're on track to be 80% funded by 2028 and 85% by 2031. That was the original target, actually, and 100% by 2039. So we're basically where you intended us to be. Now, there have been a lot of changes since then, including the local governments picking up the normal costs, that is the annual cost for teachers, and getting out of the old corridor system of funding, which was not an appropriate system, and into actuarial-based funding, where we should be and where we had been earlier. So I would say we're in quite good shape. Andy, of course, can tell you much more specifically about those numbers. Let me say two things. One is the reason we're in such good shape, Madam Chair, you will recall, is that the state employees increased their contribution by 40% in 2011, from 5% of payroll to 7% of payroll. And they took a reduced benefit in return for being assured they would have, in fact, a defined pension at the end of their service. And unlike many states, actually, while the state employees didn't enthusiastically support it, don't get me wrong, they did understand the problems and they did go along with it, and they are now paying more for receiving less. One part of the bargain, I believe, was that that the legislature and the governor agreed to put some of the savings coming from their sacrifices back into the system as a supplemental contribution above the actuarial contribution, which has been made every year, and there's no question about Maryland sticking to fully funding its actuarial contribution. But the understanding was that some of the gain from the employee sacrifices would be put back into the system to assure its strength. And it was set first at $300 million. Well, it never reached $300 million, and it was revised down until about 4 or 5 years ago. The agreement was $75 million. I would urge you to consider the impact of what you are doing. I understand that these are tough times. Believe me, I've cut budgets for many years now in one role or another. But a deal is a deal. And I will say that I think the rating agencies, and I'm speaking now as the treasurer, we just got off a great bond sale last week with AAA ratings. And one of the reasons we have these ratings, despite the fact that we have relatively high pension debt and somewhat high capital debt, for reasons we discussed a couple of weeks ago, I think. Despite that, the rating agencies all recognize the steps that were taken to restore the health of the pension system. And therefore, they really give us credit for that. They give us credit for fully funding the actuarial amount every year. And they have been giving us credit for a supplement of some amount on top of that. I'm not saying this will change our rating, but I do think it's a serious question. And And I urge you just to weigh that action against the cost of doing it. The other thing I have to come and say to you with some sadness is, this is the last budget hearing for Mr. Kenderdine, who will be retiring before we come back again a year from now. Dean is retiring at the end of June. We kept him on a couple of years longer than he wanted to stay, actually. And we are in the midst of a search for his successor. But I just want to say publicly what a great CEO Dean has been. He has led the agency, and the agency had some weaknesses, and brought everybody together. It's amazing how you can have a couple hundred people working remotely and getting everything done as smoothly as this great staff of the pension system, your pension system, does. And we are going to miss Dean very, very much. Already trying to figure out ways to bring him back in some other role. But I know you'll join me in appreciating all he has done and all he will continue to do until the very last day. And with that, Madam Chairman, I stand ready to answer any questions you might have, or to turn it over to our CEO and CIO.
I might have to add a little something about Mr. Kenderdine.
Yes.
Because I don't know that, well, I think you know this, but I don't know that people on this, in this briefing know this, that thanks to Mr. Kenderdine leaving his post as state director for the young, newly elected Senator Mikulski, I got a job as their state director. I was not that I was thrilled to see him leave the senator's office, but when I heard about it, I applied. And so I want to say thanks. It's been a long time, hasn't it, Mr. Kenderdine, Dean, and you have done a great job, and you've been a great public servant. And it's been my pleasure, to track you a little bit, because I eventually, after that first term, left Senator Mikulski's office and joined, state office, and was on Appropriations Committee and got to see you again. So thank you for your service. You will be missed. The treasurer is very accurate in her description of really an incredible job that you have done for the state and for the citizens of the state of Maryland. So thank you. I do have Delegate Lewis, who has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Treasurer Cox, it's good to see you. Dean, this is the first time I get to speak to you, but it seems you have a good legacy here. So thank you for your service. My question, I was just wondering, I'm really interested in the Terra Maria program that we have on using more diverse emerging fund managers. And there's a lot of data that shows that as we increase using that, and it spans access to capital and investments in underserved communities. I'm wondering how is that doing? How's that going?
I think Delegate Andy Palmer can answer more directly with specific numbers. I would say it's doing very well. We were, as you know, path breakers in our Terra Maria fund, and it did very well for us. It has now been somewhat reorganized because the markets have changed and it continues to be strong. And I would say on behalf of the board, we support it because it makes money. And it also brings in and grows a diverse pool of money managers, which we also want. The board also, you might be interested, is taking a very significant stand, I think, in favor of diversity, not just in our money managers, but in the management of the companies that we invest in, based on repeated studies which show that diverse boards, in fact, do better. So you bring in different perspectives, different experience, and you do better, bottom line. So I would say that in more than just making money, it also has opened our eyes to different factors that make the economy stronger, make our economy stronger. Andy, when he testifies, I think we'll have the specific numbers for the performance. But yeah, it's a program we're proud of. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you for the response. You also answered my follow-up question on the type of businesses we are investing in and whether they're diverse. I appreciate that.
It's a part of Andy's team's due diligence when we look at managers to raise the issues of diversity and in their companies and investments.
That's great.
It is. Excuse me.
Delegate Krim. Delegate Krim?
Yes, I'm right here, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
And thank you. Yes, and I will support all of the chair's comments for Dean. And I've been on the Joint Pensions Committee since I came to the legislature, and they always travel in a pack. Ann, Dean, Nancy, and Andy. They're always together, providing great information and doing such a fantastic job. So we will miss him. But I guess, and I apologize for this, Madam Chair, but I couldn't get to my raised hand quick enough. I want to ask Jason, can you defend this recommendation about reducing that $75 million? Can you defend that for me, please? Thank you. Are you there, Jason? Yes, there.
Isn't that governor's recommendation? Isn't it in the BRFA?
I'm sorry, I'm having a couple technical difficulties here. Could you repeat the question, Delegate Krim?
So I want to go back to what the treasurer was speaking about that reduction. Is this a reduction that's coming from your office or from the governor, or could you explain that and defend that?
This is a DLS recommendation.
It is? Oh, okay.
Sorry. This is a DLS recommendation to reduce the supplemental retirement contribution by $75 million in fiscal 21 and in fiscal 2022.
I was going to blame the governor.
There's a couple of reasons. One is to provide options for the legislature for other legislative priorities. One is for other fiscal concerns in the state. Again, the actuaries set the fiscal 22 rates under the assumption that the fiscal 2021 contribution would not be made.
Okay, I don't know what to say to that other than I'm not real supportive. Of course, we'll hash that out in committee, I'm sure, but I've followed this pension system now for a while, and we've worked so hard to get it to where it is now. I don't want to take a step back, and I want to continue the commitment of the legislature to get us fully funded. So thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Senator Alfred?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, if I could take a moment of personal privilege and also thank Mr. Kenderdine for his guidance. I'm relatively new here still, but as the chair of the Pension Subcommittee, he's just been incredibly gracious with his time and patient with me, and been so helpful to me in the subcommittee. I just want to thank him. He'll be appearing before our subcommittee a few more times this year, but this is the last time before the joint committee. So thank you, Mr. Kenderdine.
Delegate Haynes?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Treasurer Kopp, always good to see you as always. And Dean, thank you so much for all the service you have done in helping me through Ann on many occasions on constituent issues as relates to pensions. That's going to be a void that it's going to be hard to fill. I think Delegate Lewis sort of preempted me on my annual question to the treasurer on the. I don't know how many years it is now, but that's my annual question. So even though Andrew probably has the better answer, Treasurer Cobb, I got to ask it anyway, because I feel I'm probably going to miss something if I don't. But on the managers itself, I think last year we talked about this, and the year before when we were undergoing a change on the fund and the fund managers. My question sort of focuses on just one thing. Since we have undergone a revamp of that particular fund, and I know it's doing well, my question is, do we have more or less fund managers who fit the category of minority fund managers at this point?
I think you're going to have to ask Andrew.
Okay, all right.
We certainly have them in more categories than we did. And we are, by the way, focusing a little more on growing people out of Terra Maria.
Okay.
But then I would turn the numbers over to him.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Kinderdine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to first obviously thank everyone who has spoken for your very, very kind and generous remarks. And I'm going to try not to get choked up here. It's surprising.
You can still change your mind. It's okay.
I am very, very grateful to this body, certainly, to an outstanding Board of Trustees over the entire 14 years that I've been in this position. And most certainly the hundreds of people, about 200, give or take, every year, the outstanding staff of this agency. What's reflected in the comments that have been said about me really are a reflection of the outstanding work of those people. And I would go so far to say I'd like to, if you will, allow me the indulgence to thank all of the public servants that it's been my pleasure to work alongside since I first got started in 1979. I came to Maryland originally to get my master's degree in social work, thinking I was going to be a career social worker and community planner. And my first job out of graduate school was for the State Department of Human Resources, where I went to work for a gentleman by the name of Coleman Buzzy Hettleman, a name you'll recognize and certainly be recognized by the senator from the 11th district. And then went to work for Senator Mikulski, and then 11 years with the State Economic and Development Department, Commerce and Tourism and Promotion, and then for William Donald Schaefer for a second stint. I worked for him as governor, but then also as his chief of staff in the Comptroller's office, and then the last 14 years have been here. So it's been a wonderful career, an extremely rewarding career, and I get additional pleasure out of knowing that I've spent these last 40 years in the service of the people I've come to respect and love over the course of my career, who are themselves making a career in public service. So the fact that I've been able to have some hand in providing for their retirement at the end of their careers is a reward in and of itself, and one for which I'm exceedingly grateful. So with that, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak with regard to our fiscal 22 budget. And it certainly is, again, a pleasure to be here on behalf of the agency, the Board of Trustees, and over 412,000 active, invested, and retired participants in our system, your system. I want to join the treasurer in thanking Mr. Kramer for his analysis. As always, extremely well done, very thoughtful. And I want to express my appreciation for the working relationship that we've had in not only regard to this budget, but in the immediate past. I've submitted written testimony, which I will not read or go into any great detail on, but we will hit a few high points. With regard to the two issues that are raised by Mr. Kramer, the treasurer has spoken most eloquently about our concerns with regard to the $75 million reduction. I can only echo enthusiastically everything that she's had to say and urge consideration of its impact on the system. With regard to the narrative that's been requested with respect to the investment division personnel costs, we concur with that recommendation and will gladly provide the report that's requested. I'm going to stop there and let Mr. Palmer jump in and speak very briefly about the investment program in its current status as of March 2nd, where we presently stand. And also he can take this opportunity to respond to some of the questions that have been raised concerning Terra Maria.
Well, thank you, Dean. A pleasure to be here this afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. As Dean said, I'm Andrew Palmer, the Chief Investment Officer for the system, and not to pile on and embarrass Dean more, but one of the reasons I came here a little over 5 years ago was the opportunity to work with Dean, and not only Dean, but the treasurer, and to partner with you to help the investment division meet its objectives and build a program that would achieve its objectives over time. And it's been fantastic to work alongside Dean. He's been a mentor for me in Annapolis. He knows everybody. I don't know how we're going to replace him. It's going to be a tough go. But the partnership has been great. And when I look around the country and I see successful plans, it's plans where the legislature, the board, and the investment staff work closely together to meet objectives, and that there's consistency in the leadership and in the staffing of the investment division. You know, before I came, the turnover in the CIO position was pretty relatively frequent, and that's a sign that there's a problem, because you keep reinventing things every few years, and it's a challenge to meet performance objectives in that environment. So, working with you and the board, it's been, you know, we're on a very good path here. And then just to summarize, to connect to something that the secretary, Mr. Secretary said, Mr. Secretary Brinkley, that the remarkable work that all of state workers did in coming home and working from home with Dean's leadership, we were able to do that. We had a disaster recovery plan in place. We were able to implement it. And, you know, it's been an incredibly volatile market for investments over the last 13 months. So just about this time when we last spoke a year ago. And over that period of time, the investment staff has performed admirably. And part of that ability to perform well is because we have been able to add additional staff members in the last few years, which helped us have better risk management and understand what we were doing and be more nimble to be appropriately responding to the events as they occurred. And so with that, we've had a remarkably good run of performance. Fiscal year to date, through January, so June 30th through January 31st, the system return is up 16.2%, which is very strong. And not only is it strong, the investment performance is 177 basis points, 1.77% higher than the benchmark. And so just to connect the things you've been listening to a lot of numbers from the analysts talking about flows of money coming from the federal government. So that 177 basis points represents almost $1 billion of additional return that the staff generated working with its managers over this 7-month period. So that's really important in a period of financial uncertainty, to have the staff being on the ball and delivering for the system in a really crazy period. Longer term periods, you saw on page, I think it was page Exhibit 8 of Jason's report, that they had longer term performance metrics where we were a little bit behind the long term goals of the system. But as of January 31st, the system has exceeded the actuarial rate for 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, 10 years. All of those periods higher than the actuarial rate, with the 1 year the 5-year number almost 10%. So strong, this rally we've had has provided some strong performance for the system and continued strong relative performance. So the system is outperformed as benchmark by significant amount over those periods of time. So additional returns above just the mix that would come from the asset allocation. The committee sometimes refers to what's called the Wilshire-Tux universe, which is a listing of plans that are $25 billion and larger, and how we rank relative to them. And so this the performance that we've had recently has helped us in that comparison. In particular, in a measure that they use called the Sharpe ratio, which is a measure of a performance relative to risk. So how efficient are you in generating return with the risk you're taking to get there? And for the 5 years ending December 31st, the system is first percentile, meaning that 99% of funds had lower risk-adjusted return than the system. So the staff has been able to add return without taking a significant amount of risk over this period of time. So that we think that's particularly good news. Normally, we just look at the front page, which says, how much did you make relative to your peers? Some better news there, 21st percentile for the trailing 1 year, and median or close to median for every trailing year back to 5 years. So much improved relative to peers without taking a bunch of additional risk. So as mentioned, we're happy to provide additional information for the budgeting that's helping us do this as we've laid out in our history. And as I have mentioned before, I'd just like to reiterate that we have this strategic plan, which is designed to improve performance and lower our cost. And there's different elements from it, but from a budget perspective, we've been working to deepen the staff so that we have sufficient resources to manage the assets in a way that we have been historically. And so we've added the staff there that we believe we needed. And then we also wanted to change the way we invest and disintermediate, so take money away from external managers and manage some of that ourselves in different ways, both in public markets like bonds and stocks and private markets like private equity. And so we're making good progress on that now. As of today, we have about $6 billion of assets that are being managed directly, and about $1.5 billion in lower cost, what we call co-investments on the private side, which are driving our costs lower than they would have been if we had continued on our previous path. So making good progress on those things. And we think some of the performance, not all of it, is that you see today is because of the changes that we've been making. Obviously, we've had good manager performance, and that's been a big part of it, including in the Terra Maria program, to get back to a question that came earlier. For those of you who may not know, the Terra Maria program is an emerging manager program. It's part of our work to make sure that we have a open access platform for managers to take advantage of the opportunities to work with us. So we have this program that we engage with primarily with program managers, which are sort of like consultants for us that work to find managers to populate a particular task force. And we've the most recent change that we went through a few years ago broke up, gave each program manager an assignment. For example, we want one program manager to invest in small capitalization United States stocks. So that's the playground that we want them to go find managers, and we're going to measure them relative to small cap US stocks. And so we have a number of these different assignments for different program managers. And on balance, as the treasurer mentioned, the performance has been very good. What the new structure has given us is the ability to identify who's actually doing a good job and who's struggling a bit. And so now we have the ability to say, okay, this part's not working that well, and we're going to shift funds from there to someplace else. And so we've had a little bit of that going on in recent years. But on balance, we're maintaining the program. We spend an awful lot of time with conferences trying to promote this to other asset owners like ourselves. and to work with the managers themselves to help network with them if they're not going to work with us for other plans. Having said that, we think we have one of the questions was what's happened with the mix, and I have to check the most recent numbers, but before we made the changes in 2017, more than half of the managers in the Terra Maria program, as I mentioned, that's an emerging manager program, so it's really focused on size, not diversity. More than half of them were majority-owned firms, and I think after the changes we made, that dropped to about a quarter. So I think significant increase in the diversity of that program as well. At the same time, at the plan level, those are emerging managers. We have the opportunity to work with diverse managers that are, I guess, emerged, that are already established firms. And so our use of diverse managers grew from less than 10% to over 20% at the end of last fiscal year. So that may come down a little bit because as we're bringing assets in-house, some of the places where we're drawing money from are coming from the places where we've used some diverse managers. But so, we've had a good record there. Last point I'll make is and something the treasurer mentioned, is that we've been doing this for a long time. The system's been doing it since 2007. We've had this emerging manager program. We think it's making some inroads, but what has opened our eyes to is the lack of diversity within the asset manager community itself and within the business community in which we invest. And so we're changing the questions a bit to not only what are the emerging managers doing, but what are the other managers doing. And so we've got a committee internally is a diversity committee diversity, equity, inclusion, that's focused on what is the agency itself doing, what are our managers doing, and what are the companies they are investing in doing. And so that's someplace where we're expanding our footprint. And it's a little bit on our ESG model, where we find that just asking questions and indicating that it's really important to us that this get addressed is creating change. And we think that's really important.
Thank you. We do have Mr. Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Palmer, I really appreciate that response. And I think you hit what was going to be my question right on the head, which is the bigger fund managers making sure that they have some type of diversity inclusion plans, because as we heard from, I believe it was the CEO of Wells Fargo or someone like that, they said that they couldn't find diverse folks for these roles. And, if they're not there, it's because we're not cultivating them, and we all have a responsibility, particularly in Maryland, which is as diverse as we are, to encourage that. The only other thing I would ask is, I'm curious what degree we are also encouraging our fund managers, whether they're emerging or larger, diverse or not, that the businesses that they are investing in are also diverse businesses. It doesn't really help us stretch our dollars. Of course, the primary focus is a return for our retirees, the pension fund, but it doesn't really help us if these emerging funds are investing in the same type of businesses that the large ones would, whether domestically or internationally. So I'm curious as well. And thank you for your response.
Well, that's a great question, Delegate. Thank you for that. We are, as I tried to intimate, that is one of the things that we've identified as sort of the next steps, that we believe that focusing on the ownership of the companies that we're investing in is one level, but to generate the entrepreneurs that start companies, they need to be in the building to learn. And so we're also working with whenever you start something, the first thing you do is you count. So we're trying to find ways to assess what people are doing and what the statistics look like today, so we can benchmark changes going forward. From the board's perspective, we have a pretty extensive proxy voting policy, and there's a lot of ways that we support reporting around these issues And by reporting it, that allows investors to incorporate that into their decisions about whether to own or not, and it also gives them feedback.
And I'm going to have to, I'm sorry, Delegate Haynes, I'm going to have to interrupt. We need to move on.
Okay.
And Delegate Haynes may have a question for you offline.
Happy to have it.
Senate has capital voting, and then they have to go back to the floor. So we have got to move through, the Maryland supplemental retirement plans and the election board and stick very closely to, the analyst comments. I'm sorry, Delegate Haynes, if you can follow up with him offline. Any questions? Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Treasurer, and of course, Mr. Kenderdine, thank you, and we'll see you a few more times.
Yeah, just real quick, Madam Chair, just wanted to jump in because I wanted to add my voice to Dean's, the accolades for Dean. Look, extraordinary career. And what I've come to find, it's so much more important, even I believe, an extraordinary person, a very decent, kind, good, thoughtful human being. And I've had the chance to work with him on a separate issue, and I just know the good that he has done and will continue to do in the world. So thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate it. And I do appreciate everything that's been said. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to have Jason Kramer back up.
Madam
move.
Chairman,
Yeah.
before I leave, I'm not going to sit for the next one, but I am on that board, and
Okay.
and would like to, as Dean segues out, to introduce you all to the new executive director of the Maryland Supplemental Retirement System.
Okay. Are you going to stay around after Jason does his presentation? Okay, very good. I'll call on you then. All right, Jason, you're back up again.
Last one. I'll very briefly discuss the Maryland supplemental retirement plans. The MSRP provides employees with 4 supplemental retirement plan options and funds its operations with a fee on member accounts. The fiscal 2022 allowance is virtually unchanged from fiscal 2021. It's $2 million in special funds. Jumping quickly to Exhibit 1, showing the spending in the agency's fiscal 2022 allowance. As you can see, nearly 3/4 of the allowance is for personnel purposes. And then I'm going to skip all the way ahead to Exhibit 5 and, skip to Exhibit 3 and just show some average rates of returns over recent periods. The MSRP missed its benchmarks slightly only in the most recent 1-year period, but exceeded the benchmarks across the 3, 5, and 10-year time periods. And then finally in Exhibit 5, this chart shows the plan's assets and participant fees. The participant fees are 50 cents per month and 0.12% of assets. MSRP has run at a surplus for 2 years in a row now and anticipates again having a surplus in fiscal 2021. That will lead to a carryover balance at MSRP of about $1.5 million, or about 73% of operating expenses. In the past, when MSRP has had a large surplus, there's been a fee reduction or a fee holiday. So DLS is just recommending that MSRP discuss the potential for a fee reduction or holiday. And DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions of the analyst? I see none. All right. Treasurer Kopp, you want to come back in?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to say, as you all know, we lost our executive director who passed away after some illness and had been director for many years, Mike Halprin, and went on a great search all over the country and found right here next door, Rhonda Butler Bell. Rhonda has been with us for 2 months now. She comes after great experience at both the state and federal level and in the private sector. And she is in there stirring things up already. And I think really making a big difference, which is not always so easy when everybody is working from home. Nonetheless, it's happening, and we're extraordinarily pleased. And I take great pride in introducing Rhonda to the committees. Thanks.
Very good. And we have also Deborah Roberts, who's the Chief Financial Officer. So Rhonda, Deborah, which one wants to go first?
I'll go first. Well, I actually would just like to, I would like to respond to Treasurer Kopp, just to say thank you so much for that introduction, and just to also say, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you so much for having us today, and thank you for the warm welcome.
Oh, you're very welcome. Okay, Ms. Roberts.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. The chair and members of the committee, I'm grateful for the opportunity on behalf of the Board of Trustees and staff. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to discuss the Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plan's operating budget. I do appreciate Jason Kramer's thoughtful analysis and his understanding of our plans. We are very pleased that he concurs with the governor's allowance. I have provided a copy of our testimony. I will not read it for the sake of time, but I would like, if you may, just briefly discuss a few items on that testimony that I think are quite significant. Many of us have mentioned in the previous communications that 2020 has been a year of unprecedented change for many organizations around the globe. These changes required MSRP to quickly respond and adapt. Despite market volatility, particularly during the first half of the 2000 year, our plans remain stable. Our plans have grown from 4.3 billion to 4.9. This growth during a very destructive pandemic of the century. Make it clear our plans are consistently meeting the challenges of the economy and the environment. On behalf of the board, I'm pleased that our growth in 2020 is going to be sound, and our future looks very bright, and we are very confident of those we entrusted with its oversight. It demonstrates our leadership and our staff, our participants, that they trust us and our board in what we do as we educate our participants and supporting the growth of our plans. We did, again, Mike is my boss. I worked with Mike for 16 years, and it was a labor of love, 29 years with MSRP. But as always, our organization has adapted and has recovered. And yes, my new boss is Rhonda, and we are very pleased that she's a part of us. She brings leadership and insight and a very positive outlook for our future of the plans. In the analysis, Mr. Kramer noted that our plans reserve is estimated to exceed 3 times our 25% target, and asked us to respond to their recommendation on why a fee holiday is not warranted. For the record, generally, our fiscal office performs annual reviews of our fee structure and our reserve balance every June. However, it noted in the budget analysis and in our response testimony at the end of January of 2021, our reserve has climbed to a little over 1.5 million. This prompted the reserve and fee review to be performed much earlier than in the past. I am very pleased to announce the board has approved a maximum 5-month asset fee holiday effective immediately. This holiday is expected to decrease our reserve by 36%, estimated 36%. And as I've mentioned in previous testimonies, it is our policy to review our reserve and fees and to determine whether market conditions and our reserve balance warrant consideration of a temporary or permanent fee adjustment. And we will continue this practice. I do look forward to continue working with your committee and with the executive branch leaders to protect the long-term financial interests of our state employees and families. And I do appreciate your consideration, and I am available for any questions that you might have.
Very good. Any questions? Any questions? I see none. Well, Rhonda, again, welcome to you, and we'll see more of you. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Deborah. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
We're gonna, and thank you, by the way, Jason, for your work today. We are gonna now move to the State Board of Elections. Grace Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will share my screen now. It's my pleasure to present the State Board of Elections Fiscal 2022 Budget Analysis. The budget decreases more than 20% from the working appropriation, and this is mostly driven by one-time unanticipated costs associated with the presidential general election. I'll discuss more about the budget in a minute, but I'll start with the agency's performance measures, specifically related to the presidential election cycle. As shown in Exhibit 1, substantially more voters voted by mail in 2020 than in 2016, while substantially fewer voters voted on Election Day. Turnout remained relatively level from the 2016 presidential election cycle, but there were more registered voters, which has, the number of registered voters has grown in each of the prior 4 presidential election cycles as well. Now going to the budget discussion, SB receives $8.5 million in general fund deficiencies for fiscal 2021. $7.3 million of which is to cover unanticipated presidential general election costs, and an additional $500,000 is for ballots. During the interim, a $16.4 million amendment was processed to cover the cost of the unanticipated costs associated with the presidential general election. When the amendment was processed, the general fund impact of the amendment was expected to be 47%, but SB later informed DLS that the general fund impact of this amendment would actually grow to 72%, reflecting the State Board's decision to entirely support the cost of ballot applications with general funds. And DLS notes that the general fund deficiency as processed comprises neither the 47% nor the 72% estimate. In addition, SB has not provided DLS with the amount of the expected special fund reversion that these general funds are intended to replace. That's expected at the end of fiscal 2021. So given that certain categories of costs have recently changed, such as the cost of mailed ballots that before the pandemic was an entirely local cost, but now there's a state share for that cost, and the cost of ballot applications, which the expected fund split for that category of cost changed throughout the interim, and that DLS was provided with varying estimates of the general fund impact of these unanticipated presidential general election costs, and that an estimate of the special fund reversion remains unavailable. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative, requesting a report on local cost sharing. I'll show that recommendation at the end of the presentation, but right now I'll move to the fiscal 2022 budget discussion. As shown in Exhibit 4, almost half of the allowance goes to various IT purposes, including the voter registration system and the agency's 2 IT projects, the agency election management system and the 2022 poll book project. Almost a fifth of the allowance is for administering the gubernatorial primary election. Now, while I mentioned earlier that the unanticipated presidential general election costs drive most of the decrease from fiscal 21 to 22, a presidential primary election, even in a normal, a presidential general election, even in a normal year, would be expected to cost more than a gubernatorial primary election. So a decrease between fiscal 21 and 22 would have been expected. Some of the decrease from those unanticipated presidential general election costs is offset by costs associated with the poll book major IT project. $8.5 million will be used to purchase or lease poll books, but SB has not decided whether it will purchase or lease the poll books in the upcoming fiscal year yet. The agency receives 2 new positions in fiscal 2022, comprising a $130,000 increase over fiscal $130,000 increase over fiscal 2021. Then DLS has 1 issue to discuss pertaining to the agency's major IT projects. SB is currently overseeing 2 major IT projects, the agency election management system and the 2022 poll book project, as I mentioned earlier. The agency election management system is about 4 months behind from the timeline submitted in July, and this is mostly due to the complications associated with administering the presidential general election in a very different way than prior years, so project resources were redirected during that time. The cost estimate appears to change significantly, but that's mostly because the project is retained in the major IT program for an additional year, which was not anticipated in the 2020 session. Now moving on to the poll book project, substantially more costs are shifted to local governments for this project. In the 2020 session, local governments were expected to contribute almost 70% of the total project's cost. But in the 2021 session, local governments will provide almost 90% of the project's cost. In addition, the 2022 contribution from local governments is expected to be almost double what was expected last session. The availability of local government funding is noted as a risk to this project. Another risk noted for this project is the availability of SB staff to meet with the poll book project team as they attempt to roll this out in advance of the gubernatorial primary election. The gubernatorial primary will be the first time the poll book solution is used in solo use. This project, the new poll book solution cannot be used in parallel to the legacy system. In addition, the agency election management system will be used for the first time in the gubernatorial primary as well. Given DLS's concerns with the timelines and the varying cost estimates, DLS recommends adopting narrative requesting quarterly reports on IT development. And also this is the recommendation for the report on local cost sharing. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Very good. Any questions for the analyst? Delegate Grist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going back to those poll books. I'm just going back into history. It was, I guess the requirement was, a bill was passed back in 2006. And back then the state was paying 100% of the cost of those poll books. And then in 2016, it was reduced to 50%. The sponsors of that bill was actually House Bill 1457. And at that time, the sponsors were Delegate Kittleman, then Delegate Eckert, and Delegate McIntosh. Now, so my question is the mandate still in effect to have this program? And I guess my second question, if it is there anything in the BRFA that takes the state off the hook for that $6 million reduction? And then my third question is, are we going to have them in the next election or not? Does it look like to you? Or is this a question I should probably ask the department?
I can say that the poll book project anticipates that local governments will pay for the entirety of the hardware purchases, including the cost of the poll books. SB may be able to elaborate more on some of your points. Does that help?
Yeah,
and I'd say, Delegate, I'd say I was in pretty good company, wouldn't you? Any other questions? We'll ask the agency when they come forward. Okay, very good. We now have Linda Lamone, Administrator, Nikki Carlson, Deputy Administrator, and Shelley Holloman, Director of Budget and Finance for the State Board of Elections.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the committees. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the DLS analysis of our 2022 budget. In anticipation of some of your questions, I'd just like to make a couple of comments before we move into the specific areas that we've been asked to address. The FY21 deficiency request, of course, as you know and have heard over and over again, I'm sure, was a result of the global COVID pandemic that dramatically impacted the way we run elections and how many elections we had last year. It hasn't been approved yet by the General Assembly, and just want to note that invoices are still coming in. Shelley informed me a little while ago that we just got 81 from the Maryland Correctional MCE, they were just received. Also, just want to point out that throughout her analysis, Grace has pointed out that there has been a shift in the cost sharing between general and special, i.e. county funds. That is not the case. There's been no changes in how costs are allocated. It's based on uncodified language in the statute, advice from the Attorney General, prior agreements, and past practices. So there's been no major shift there. We, of course, will provide the requested information about cost sharing, but it seems a little premature for DLS to ask or imply that the practices have changed without really knowing and without having asked us what the basis is. The election management system, which is discussed on pages 12 and 13 and page 20, the project was sort of put on hold for a little while last year because we needed to divert resources to managing the election. We extended the schedule, but the extended schedule has given us a number of benefits, which I'm sure you all can appreciate, with being able to have more testing and a true mock election before integration to make sure everything is working correctly. Plus, I also should note that we used it in parallel with our existing system last November, and it worked very well. Holbrook project, the analysis is generally concerned with 3 general areas: cost, timeline, and risks. I just want to point out that we're still in the procurement process. We just got the responses to the RFPs in, so we don't know what the costs are going to be. But we have been sharing with the local boards of election continuing and the counties over the project, what we believe the costs might be so that they can estimate what they might have to pay for. It's a major IT project. It's going to cost money. And we have tried to reduce the cost by strategically using redefining the staffing categories that we are paying for in the staffing contract. There's a detailed and very well-developed schedule for this project, so I am not at all concerned about the timing of it. The risks, some risks, as you know, are different from others. The analysis doesn't include how we're handling those risks. So, for example, in personnel, we have supplemented the personnel from the staffing contract so that, especially last year, my staff was free to deal with planning the election. The schedule, it's managed by continuous review of what's going on. And the functionality, of course, is a product of evaluating the products that are being submitted. And we will be testing them through various stages of the procurement process. So I think the delegate pointed out in 2006, the contract was approved at the June 7th, 2006 meeting of the Board of Public Works, and we used them in the primary on September the 12th. So we know how to implement a project like this, and we will do so again. One other thing that was pointed out in the analysis that we postponed the implementation of a new voting system. We did indeed do that. And that was because the voting system market hasn't changed significantly since the last procurement, and the fiscal impact on the system was just too great, considering the fact that we probably wouldn't be getting anything that was new and exciting. There are several comments about the 2020 Joint Chairman's Report. One of them has to deal with communications with the members of the Board of Elections. I just note that from July 1st to the end of last year, there were 11 public meetings and weekly conference calls with the chair and the vice chair of the board. And there have been no complaints whatsoever about lack of communication. We also implemented with the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services and assistance from several advocacy organizations, a program to provide absentee and voter registration information to those people that were incarcerated but who were eligible to vote. We had there were 3 counties that already had an existing project, and so we implemented it in the other 21 counties and greatly enhanced the ability of our citizens to participate in the electoral process. I note there is a couple of bills this session that would provide greater access to voting for eligible individuals, but we are committed to continue to work with the department and our local jails and advocates to continue the program regardless of what happens with the bill. The issues that were raised in the analysis, they want us to comment on how we plan to proactively monitor the progress of our major information development projects. We proactively monitor all of our projects. There are a zillion meetings going on a weekly basis. We make sure that the staff on the different projects are collaborating with one another. I am kept informed, and if we identify any contractual deficiencies, we use the contractual vehicles to make sure that the vendors are doing what they're supposed to be doing. For the election management project, again, there's monthly meetings, bi-weekly meetings, daily team meetings. So, I mean, the implication that we're not handling these projects is somewhat surprising to me. And another criticism was that we were not able to handle the poll book project while also preparing for the gubernatorial election. And I can assure you that the team that we put together for this very major project is well on their way. And I am confident that the resources are available on my staff to plan for the 2022 election. Lastly, the department has a couple of recommendations I'd like to comment on. The narrative regarding the cost sharing, sure, we're happy to do that, but it's not changed. It hasn't changed. It's the same thing. The counties are well aware of it. And then the one that's a little troubling is the narrative language requesting quarterly reports on all IT development projects. With all due respect, we would have to drop everything we're doing to report on everything that we're doing. And we can certainly agree to continue to provide quarterly reports for the 2 major IT projects, i.e. poll books and the election management system. We're happy to do that. The committee needs to be aware, however, of the effort involved in these reports. It takes away from what we're really trying to do, which is prepare for your election in 2022 and implement these projects. Lastly, I'd just like to say that DLS appears to be concerned with staff availability to complete the projects and prepare for the 2022 election, but yet they really want to have all these reports done. And there's been no sort of recognition of the Herculean effort that the staff on in my office and at the local boards of elections did in 2020 to conduct 4 elections, 3 of which were delivered in a method that was entirely new to us in Maryland, and they got it done. And that's what we do in elections. We get it done. And I just want to say how proud I am of all of them and to thank you all again for your support. And as you can see, we are really busy, but we'll get it done. We always do. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Administrator Lamone. We have questions from members of the House Appropriations Committee. First, the Delegate Jeff Grice is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to these poll books, I guess I'll ask you the same question. I think you partially, or maybe have already answered the question with, I guess, House Bill 1457. You said it was uncodified language, so the state's not really necessarily on the hook for that $6 million. Is that correct?
Nikki is on the phone, Delegate. She actually drafted the uncodified language that was put in the code, I think in 2001, and is probably a little bit better able. Nikki, can you?
Sure. Thank you. For the record, Nikki Charlson, Deputy Administrator. So House Bill 1457 includes uncodified language, which we treat as if it were codified. So it has the same force and effect as if it were codified, and you actually have a bill pending in the legislature this session that would do that. That language in House Bill 1457 relates to the voting system, not the electronic poll books. And so I think it was you who asked earlier about the 2006 funding. That was the agreement that the state made, the state would initially purchase the poll books. I'm going back away, so I might not have it right, but I think the state agreed to purchase the poll books, and then the counties were responsible for supporting it and buying any more. And that's been the plan and agreement that's been in place. Understanding that purchasing the new poll books, as Linda said, it's a IT project. It's big and it's expensive. And while we're doing everything we can to reduce those costs, even so, we have asked and DBM has agreed for us to pay for some of the project management costs of it. That we thought that this is a statewide project. The state should have some funds in it. And so we have, we requested and received authorization to pay for half of the project management and personnel implementation costs. So that's the 1457 and the 2006 purchase agreement.
But aren't these polling books part of the voting system though?
Well, they're not under the definition of either federal law or state law. So they are a standalone system that certainly is what we call part of our election system, but it's not part of the system that tabulates votes, which is how voting systems defined under federal and state law.
But when we verify voters when they come in, I mean, that seems like it's all part of the same process though to me. And then, what happens if the counties are in a real budget crunch now, with COVID and some of the other mandates that we put on them, as far as additional funding. And this is yet another one because this is unexpected for them, that they're gonna have to pick up a larger share of the cost of that. And I guess from their perspective, this is all part of, those polling books are all part of the same process. And so what if a county decides, we just don't have the money and we're not gonna, can they just not do it? That doesn't make any sense to me. That can they make the decision not to do it? Because obviously they don't have the decision to not fund it, obviously, is from what I'm hearing.
So we have been working with the counties for the last year or so to make sure that they've been aware of any cost estimate changes that we've seen so that they could budget accordingly. Shelley, who's our budget director, who's on the call, gives them updates as information is known so that they can budget appropriately. But in elections in Maryland are statewide, and we have uniform procedures. So it is something that will be implemented statewide. And we are looking at, I think Linda mentioned, and the analysis talks about funding through the state treasurer's office, which is exactly one of the reasons in response to what you're saying is the counties have asked us to fund it over time. And so that's why we are eagerly awaiting the financials and selecting a solution so we can explore financing it to spread it out over 3 years or 5 years or whatever is the appropriate length of financing.
Okay, I understand it is a surprise to them. And my final question is, who made this decision? Was this a decision by the governor, or was this a department decision to cut this funding?
To cut what fund? I'm sorry.
I don't understand your question, Donna.
The $6 million to shift that cost onto the counties.
Well, the poll books, the cost model for the poll books after that initial investment by the state was that the counties paid for them. And so it's since that time, poll books have been 100% special county funding funded system. And so that's what we are continuing.
Thank you.
Senator McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Administrator. I think the first point that I should acknowledge is while we had our challenges in the primary election, and there were challenges, you showed leadership in our general election and getting us across the finish line. So I say thank you. The question that I would like to raise is you were able to work with Secretary Robert Green in reference to our public safety facilities, our state of Maryland public safety facilities, to make sure that folks that had the right to vote got their right to vote. I know that you commented on the 2022 election a number of times during this hearing in the preparation of the 2022 election. I just want to ask, do you have a plan to continue to do the work that was done in 2020 for our public safety facilities that are state regulated?
Yes, Senator, I'm sorry, I must have sort of skipped over it too quickly. Yes, we do have a plan. We are going to continue. And actually 3 of the counties already had one in place. I think Montgomery is one of them. I don't remember the other 2. Prince George's might have been it. And then we took care of the other 21. And we are committed to working both with the State Department and with the local jails to continue the project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Senator, thank you for your help with that project.
Yes, ma'am.
Delegate Mark Corman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, I heard the comment from the administrator about the DLS language and the excellent analysis. It's analysis, not criticism, about the quarterly reports. And I was trying to look up, I couldn't get it up in my system here. Is this language different than last year? Was last year limited to those 2 major projects, and your concern is this year it's all major IT development projects? Is that the distinction?
Yes.
Okay.
She uses the word all.
Right. Okay. But it's a major technology development project. So, I mean, is there a definition for that?
Well, I think at one place she uses, Nikki, if you can help me, that she uses the word all IT projects.
I mean, pretty clear it says major information technology development projects. I don't know if that has a defined term. It's not really my area, but that, you know, it might not be quite as broad as you think. I wanted to ask about the poll books, following up on a theme from my colleague from the Eastern Shore, I suppose. How many poll books are you looking to purchase, or collaboratively purchase, however you want to put it?
Nikki, you haven't, do we know that yet?
Well, we've not yet, but we currently have, I believe it's about 6,000 to 7,000 poll books. So it varies based on the number of precincts. So with some adjustments for redistricting, but I don't know the number that's in the RFP for evaluation purposes, but that's about what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, I hear your point about it's a big, expensive IT project and it costs money, but you all were kind enough to send over some of your comps from when you put the RFP together. And the 30 million budgeted, I mean, obviously it's a larger number than many of your comps because you're buying more ebooks or poll books, but if you do it on a per poll book basis, it's also a lot higher, which is odd because usually when you buy more units of something, you get it for a better per unit rate. So I'm a little confused at when I looked at the comps you all sent over an Excel spreadsheet a few months ago, maybe a month and a half ago now, why the total cost is so high. However we split it up, whether it's 99% county and 1% state or vice versa, why is the total cost look so big? Or do you not expect it to come in anywhere near that $30 million? That's just sort of a budgeted amount.
That, I think the latter, delegate, we haven't seen the financials yet from the bidders.
Okay, but you have comps. So why is your projection so much higher than the comps?
I'll have to defer to Nikki again. She's been helping supervise that RFP process.
So I believe that the full cost of the project includes more than just equipment. It includes training, it includes project management support, personnel. So it's more than just buying the equipment, and part of it's going to depend on what the package puts together. Does the per unit price include licensing, or is it separate? So it is an estimate based on what we did in the market, and then added in some variability as well as some personnel and cost to implement and transport and other things.
Sure, but the way I get the Rhode Island comp number is by taking their total cost, not just their poll book cost. So I'm just attributing it on a per unit basis, assuming that, you know, training is linked to the per poll book. But however you do it, our numbers just look way higher than the things you're comping with. So I'm just looking for, I guess, maybe a more focused estimate of the actual cost. If you come back later and say, hey, we thought it was going to cost 30 million, it only cost 20 million, that's great. You know, $10 million that can go to other needs. But I also think we should probably be realistic in our budgeting, and you know, their comps you sent over to us, right? They're not my comps. They're in your Excel spreadsheet. So I guess I'm just looking, and you don't have to answer now, Nikki. You can follow up with me, but
that's what I was going to ask, if we could follow up afterwards, so I can have those sheets in front of me and other people that can answer your more detailed questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Corman. Thank you, Deputy Administrator Nikki Charlson. We also have with us Director of Budget and Finance for the State Board of Elections, Ms. Shelley Holland, with us too. Your next question from Delegate Reed Novotny.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just had a question. You had touched on a little bit about the changing environment in the 2020 presidential election. So following that theme, what did your election officials have to adapt to, and how did they adapt, and what lessons learned during the 2020 election are you going to pull forward?
Well, that's a broad question. Thank you for it, and welcome to the General Assembly. The first thing that hit us, of course, is once the emergency was declared and the governor changed the primary election, the general election for the 7th Congressional District, and we had to switch from delivering an in-person election to an election by mail, and that sort of snowballed into a whole bunch of decisions as to not only how we were going to conduct the election, but how we were going to count it. And one of the things that became apparent to us immediately is that we went to these vote centers for the limited amount of in-person voting we had. How were we going to report the votes? And traditionally, in-person voting is reported at the precinct level. So we had to make sure that the voting system was capable and the election management system was capable of capturing the votes by precinct. And then we discovered that we really needed to expand that because to count the votes by the absentee or mail-in ballots by precinct because of the large number that were going to be voting that way. That was probably one of the biggest pressure points on me, on my staff and the local boards, because the local boards then had to manage a zillion more different ballot styles and in both in the in-person and in the tabulating of the mail-in ballots. I guess what's really surprised me was how well the staff and at my office and the staff of the local boards sort of pitched in and said, okay, let's get this done. We've only got a couple of weeks to do it. Let's figure it out. Let's get it done. We had meetings all the time to discuss the various pressure points that were coming up. And then, as you know, right after that, we had the presidential primary, where there were, as Senator McRae noted, some problems. What we learned from the primary election was we needed a different printer, somebody that could be more responsive to our needs in getting ready to mail however the governor decided to conduct the general election. We didn't know at that point, right after the primary, whether it was going to be an election where everyone would get a ballot mailed to them, or whether or not it was going to be everyone got an application. And once he decided that he wanted to do the latter, then we had to make sure that our printer could handle the additional workload, which was what happened in June. The printer was contracted to do about a 6% absentee ballot mailing, and then all of a sudden they were asked to do 80%, and the capacity just wasn't there. So we immediately started a procurement process to get a new printer. And we were fortunate to find one that was very flexible and was able to handle that side of the whole planning and execution process. Then the next thing we had to figure out was how do we help the local boards of elections process all this paperwork that's going to be coming in. And so the local boards were absolutely, totally swamped. And we were able to, with the cooperation of the Office of Personnel and DBM and the Motor Vehicle Administration, put together a data center to process a lot of this stuff. So that we were constantly changing and trying to adapt to make the election work. And I was absolutely amazed, but so totally proud at the way everybody responded, from the executive branch to the local, to the county boards, to the county administration. Everyone just sort of pitched in and said, okay, we're going to make this happen. And it did. It was wonderful. And the voters' enthusiasm and happiness with the way it worked was just wonderful to watch.
This is Chair McIntosh. I'd love to hear more about this election, but we do have a Senate.
Sorry.
We've got capital, they've got capital, they've got to go back to the floor. So if you have a question that can only be answered in this forum that you cannot ask Ms. Lamone offline, I'll allow you to ask it. But if you can ask her offline, I think the Senate in particular would appreciate it. I think that's what happened. Thank you very much. And this concludes our briefing today. Do you want to add anything, Chairman Gazzoni?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody have a healthy and safe day. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have run up against the time clock for especially the Senate, but for us too. We have Capitol, correct?
That's right, Madam Chair.
We all
And
do.
we'll give,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.